So I downloaded a couple of images for myself. I actually moved those to the module if you want to work with those, but I found a picture of an eraser, and I'm going to experiment with that, okay? So that's the one that I'm going to use. And, you know, I've been talking about what I call best practices. So I am going to, oh, my workspace is so messy. I'm going to create a new folder for myself, and this is our second day meeting, so I'm just going to call it day 2, and I'm going to put the image in that folder. So I'm going to advocate or talk about organizing your content on a regular basis. You'll see that I basically created a little project folder for myself, and the image is placed in there. And then my Illustrator file is going to be in the same folder when everything is all said and done. Okay, so I want to include this image in my workspace. Okay, so this is referred to as placing. In some softwares they call it importing, but in Illustrator they call it placing. And placing is found under the File menu. You'll notice it's under the File menu, and it's about halfway down the menu, so it's called placing. You'll notice that there is a hotkey for it. It's Shift-Command-P, but I normally don't use it in Illustrator. I just kind of go to Place. So I'll go to File, Place, and then I'll select my image and place it in my document. Now, before I do that, I want to do something else. I want to open up my Layers panel. So all of my panels, not all of them, but a good portion of my important panels are over here on the right. And there's an icon that looks like 2 sheets of paper. They look like 2 sheets of paper over one another. It's this one right here. This one right here. That's your Layers panel. So I'm going to click on that, and that's going to open up the Layer menu. Okay, and I'm going to tear this tab away. I held my mouse down on it, holding my mouse down, and I'm just dragging that, and it's going to tear it away. Right? And then I'm going to close this. So what I've done is I've isolated the layer panel. Okay, now not only am I going to isolate the layer panel, I'm going to make the panel bigger. So I'm going to click on this corner, and I'm going to drag it down, maybe drag it a little bit wider so I have more space to work with in this panel. So a panel is a fancy form of a window. A panel is a fancy form of a window. Do you see a menu? Do you see a menu that manages windows in the software? Do you see a menu that manages windows in the software? So as you can see, it's up here. There it is, right there. Right there. Okay, so this window menu manages our panels. I think I brought this up in our last class, but I'm mentioning it again. You'll notice that the panels are listed in alphabetical order. So if you can't find one, if you can't find the icon, oh, I can't find the little icon that looks like 2 sheets of paper. I can't find it now. You go to the window menu, and you look in alphabetical order for layers. There it is, and then you select it. Does that make sense? Okay, so you'll notice that underneath this long list of windows, there's an area called libraries. And so these libraries, we're going to look at them later throughout the quarter, but the window menu also holds libraries of collected materials that you might want to work with. Okay, does that make sense? So they're libraries. And then look at the very bottom. What do you think this is? It says Untitled 3. What is this? Any guesses? It's the document that I have open. So if I had 10 documents open, you would see a list of all 10 names in that spot. Does that make sense? So I only have one document open. That's the one I see. And you'll notice there's a check mark next to it. But if I had 10 of them open in my software, I would see a list of 10. Okay, last but not least, remember, this is where we go at the beginning of our session. We go to the workspace, and these are additional workspaces. These are additional workspaces where I might have a different collection of panels and tools. But I like to teach Essentials Classic. That's what I teach. Okay? And later on your own or at home, you can work whatever whichever structure you want. But I teach to Essentials Classic, and there's the reset. Are we clear? Everybody got that? Okay, so it was really important to open up the layer panel because when I place something, it's going to change the layer panel. And I now have to be concerned with organizing my information. So that's why I opened this up first before I placed anything. So I want to see what happens here. Before we go any further, we talked about the layer panel last time in class. If I make a new layer, what should I expect? Anybody? It's going to be on top of it. Angela says that. What about the name of the layer? Layer 2. So it's always a sequence number, and it stacks it on top. It stacks it on top. That's called stacking order. That's an official term for software, stacking order. That's the logic that the software uses when you create content. It's called stacking order. Okay, so let's place an image. So I'm going to go to the File menu, and I'm going to go to Place, right there, Place. And I'm going to navigate. To my Day 2 folder, and there's the image of the eraser that I set aside for myself, and I'm going to go ahead and select Place. Now, you'll notice that the software shows a little thumbnail preview of the image. And when I click on the artboard, it will place the upper left corner at that spot. Do you see how the icon is conveying that? Do you see how this looks like an upper left corner? So it's going to put the upper left corner of my image right there. It's going to grow from it. Okay, so let's see that happen. Boom. Okay, saw that? All right, so let me do that one more time. I'm going to go to File. I'm going to go to Place. I'm going to select my image. And I'm going to hit the Place button. I get a little thumbnail preview. I click here, and it places the image for me. Now, let me do that one more time. But in this case, what I want you to do, let's look at the layer panel. Okay? Check it out. Keep an eye on the layer panel. Do you see how the layer panel changed? It's subtle. It's kind of hard to see, but you'll notice that there isn't a thumbnail preview. And you'll notice that there aren't any other symbols or icons in this area. Watch when I click, you get a thumbnail preview, and I get a little drop-down arrow right here. So it changes it slightly. Okay, so I'm going to increase the size of this so you can see this a little bit better. Let's see here. Panel options, large icon. Okay, it's not that much better, but a little bit better. When you click on this little arrow, it populates anything inside the layer. So if you work in Photoshop, layers in Illustrator is going to take a little bit of time to get used to it. Because in Photoshop, every object is a layer. In Illustrator, you have layers. You should think of them more as a folder that hold objects inside of them. Okay, does that make sense? So when I place this image, let me do that again. File, Place. Place this image. Is the image the same size? Does the image fit well on my page? No, it's way too big, right? It's way too big. So what do I do? Well, you'll notice that my image, you should see an edge all the way around it. And with this edge, you should also see these little white boxes on the corners, and then also halfway through the image on the sides and on the top. You see those little boxes? So those boxes and that edge is called a bounding box. Does everybody have that? Does anybody not see that? Everybody has it? Good. You do not have a bounding box? Do you have your image selected? Okay, so the bounding box is a visual aid. Okay, so a visual aid. So in Illustrator, a lot of the design applications have visual aids. What is a visual aid? A visual aid is a tool that helps you understand your content. Sometimes it helps you draw. Sometimes it helps you understand the edge of your graphic. So there's a menu in the top. There's a menu in the top that allows you to manage your visual aids. Your visual aids. Which menu do you think it is? Visual aids. Look at the name of the menus. View. Who said that? Great job. So the view menu manages visual aids. Doesn't that make sense? Right, makes sense. The view menu manages visual aids. So a ruler is a visual aid. Did we learn rulers last time? So if I hit Command R, that turns on the rulers, right? So let's check out the view menu. You'll notice that halfway through the visual aid menu, what does it say right there? Rulers, hide. So the view menu has visual aids inside of it. And we're going to learn a lot of these visual aids as the quarter progresses. But for now, the visual aid that you need to have on is called the bounding box. And the bounding box is available to us right below the rulers. See where it says rulers? Right below it. So this is a little confusing. I don't like how they have this set up. If yours says hide, that means your bounding box is on. If it says show, it means it's off. So as long as it says hide, you're good because it's a toggle. It toggles it on and off, and it's either show or hide. So you want it to say hide. All right, so I have my bounding box on. This says hide next to it. So there was a young lady over here who said that you didn't have the bounding box. Is it set correctly there for you?
No, this not works for my picture.
It doesn't work for your picture? Okay, let me go check and see. Oh, she has the bounding box.
I think because we don't have the...
Yeah, you don't have the X. It depends on the image type. Okay, so the bounding box, let me clarify, is only the edge. It's only the edge and the little squares. If you don't see the X, that's not a big deal. Don't worry about that. Okay? And the X is there because certain file types do not grab the X, do not create this. But what I want you to see is this edge here and these little boxes. Okay? Are we good? Okay. I'm going somewhere with this, guys. I promise. I promise I'm going somewhere with this. All right, so look. I need to select this image to modify it. I need to select this image to modify it. So, Michelle, where are you, Michelle? Michelle, what is the most important tool to grab content? What is it called? The most important tool to grab content? It's okay. I'll go on to somebody else. Liberty, what's the selection tool? Can you describe what it looks like? It looks like a black arrow. So this is the most important selection tool. So I'm going to click on the black arrow, and I'm going to click on this object. That activates it and selects it. It actually does three things. It isolates it. It isolates it, meaning that if there's other things in my document, it's selecting that and ignoring everything else. So it's selecting it, activating it, and isolating it. So I am isolating and selecting this graphic. Now that I have it selected, I want to deselect it. Deselect it. You guys, did anybody pick up earlier today? I showed you where deselect was at. Did anybody pick up on that? Can anybody tell me?
Select option.
No, I want to ask the lady next to you. What you were going to say? You were going to describe.
I was just about to say the select option or the deselect.
So the select menu has a deselect. See how it deselected it? So I can go to the black arrow and click on it, and then I could go to select, deselect. But you know what? That's really time consuming. That's really slow. So let me show you what I do, okay? So I go to the black arrow and I select my object. Now when I don't want it selected, I just click off of it. It's deselected. Does that make sense? Much easier, right? Okay.
What did you do, Mom?
So I went to the black arrow, I selected the object, and then I clicked off of it, and that deselects it. Okay, now, when I select an object, you'll notice, so check out the layer panel. Check out the layer panel. Look, deselect, select, deselect, select. Do you see the difference in the layer panel? So the layer panel, when you select something, the object gets this little selection indicator. It's this little square to the right of the layer object. To the right of the layer object. So if you see one of these squares, it's saying this object is selected. Does that make sense? And when I click off of it, it goes away. You click here, on, click here, off. Click here, on, click here, off. Everybody good with that? Are you good with that? Yeah, okay. Any questions? Any questions? All right, so let's change the size of this object. So I'm going to click on this, I'm selecting it, and now I want to change the size of this object. So look, I'm grabbing the corner of the bounding box. I'm grabbing the corner of the bounding box, and I'm changing its size. Okay, so I'm going to try to make it fit nicely on this page. Did I do a good job? What do you guys think? Did I do a good job? It's squished now. It's squished. Do you guys like that? It's ugly, right? So look, here's the deal. This is called a non-proportional scale. What I just did is non-proportionally scale the object. That means that when I scaled it, the width and the height were working independently. And what I'm left with is called a distortion. Okay, so whenever you work with images in graphic design and you do this, this is what an amateur does. Okay, so if you want to be an amateur, practice this. If you want to be a professional, you want to make sure that the width and the height is working together. Okay, now there's a couple of things you should be aware of. 2019 Illustrator, I've been told, has it locked by default, and you hold Shift to break the X and Y. This version is the opposite. Okay, so if you're working at home, you probably have a better feature than I do. Okay, one more thing. Have you guys ever heard the term undo? Undo. So Illustrator has what some people call unlimited undos. Do you guys know what I mean by unlimited undos? So you can do undo, 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 and it goes back in time, right? Well, that's a lie. It doesn't have unlimited undos. It actually has a setting that controls how many undos there are in the software. It's in your preferences, and I think it's 50 steps. It's either 50 or 100. I can't remember what it is. But the reality is, you should not rely on undos. You should not use that to protect you from making mistakes. Does that make sense? And let me explain to you why. If I close the file right now, it forgets all of the things that I did. So I can't undo this anymore. If the file crashes, I can't undo any of the things that I've applied to this. So that's a problem. So I think it's okay to undo immediately. In other words, I just made a mistake. I'm going to undo a couple of times. But I'm not going to expect to fix something I did 10 minutes ago. The software cannot remember that many steps. Does that make sense? So I can undo maybe what I've done in the last minute. But beyond that, I'm not going to rely on it. So one of my goals as an instructor is to teach you how to understand the software in a way where if you make a mistake, you can recover easily from it. In some cases, we undo if it happened immediately. And in some cases, we just fix it because we're comfortable enough to just fix it. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm going to undo. And undo is under the edit menu. So the edit menu has undo at the top, and it has redo right below that. The edit menu also has features like cut, copy, paste. So these are features that you would find in Word or any other software. These are universal software tools and features. Yes, Angie.
Mine says undo embed images.
That was the last thing that you did. So when mine was undo move. Okay, so it's always going to say the previous thing. Okay, so it's going to say undo move, and then it's going to go back in a list and say something different. You'll also notice that there's different types of paste. There's also a spell checker. You see that? Spell checker. There's also, see if there's something really important in here. Color settings, so you could change it to a different color setting. That's really all that's important under the edit menu. The most important thing though is undo. What's the hotkey for undo? Command Z, right? So let me hit Command Z. Look, Command Z, Command Z, Command Z, Command Z. See, it goes back in time, right? But I don't expect it to remember things that I did 5 minutes ago. Maybe immediately I can correct it. Does that make sense? Okay, so I want to scale this not in this distorted way. I want to scale it where the width and the height is being scaled at the same time. That's called the proportional scale. Okay, so I'm going to click on this corner, and I'm also going to hold the Shift key down, the Shift key. So I'm holding Shift, I'm clicking on this corner, and I'm going to drag, and you'll notice that when I do this, it locks the width and the height. So I'm holding Shift, and it's dragging the width and the height at the same time. So now it's the same dimension. Does that make sense, everybody?